it was actually quite interesting to see the reaction from the press to what DLSS 3.5 is doing. And there was a general acceptance with the asterisks and the caveats that, hey, this is actually really impressive technology. And it's something that's only exclusive to NVIDIA. So in the RX 7800 XT review, I sort of had a bit, well, I wouldn't say it's a bit of a rant, it's more of an open question to the audience, to other reviewers possibly, which is simply this. If you've got one vendor that has, superior features to another vendor, to the point where with Cyberpunk, and I guess with the upcoming Alan Wake, you're getting an absolutely transformed game. How do we factor that into our reviews? And more generally, we're moving into a situation now where upscaling is actually factored into engine design. Unreal Engine 5, right? I mean, go back to The Matrix Awakens. There's actually a part in that demo where it's just a showcase of all of the different technologies and how they merge together to produce that phenomenal effect. And basically, Unreal Engine 5 was built with upscaling in mind, right? How do you actually factor that into a GPU review where the entire basis of everybody's GPU reviews, ours included, is that we're judging all of these products based on the fact that they can actually deliver the same thing, the same workload, just with performance differentials. But that's not the case anymore. Especially with DLSS, which I do think has been a game-changing technology, possibly more so than RT. At this point, it's just something that people want. We saw obviously with the mods for Starfield, 960,000 DLSS mod downloads, 960,000. It's clearly a technology that people with RTX cards want. How do we factor this into reviews? And I'm actually open to a full discussion across the board, and I actually put this to supporters, right? Yeah. And we got some interesting responses here. And I guess this one is actually interesting. This one from Retro Sean. Hi DF, exclamation marks. When it comes to GPU benchmarks, the problem is NVIDIA's marketing team want to pretend that frame generation is the same as a higher base frame rate when we know it is not. I think you could design a review where you could include both performance data and then a section on performance stacking up the best of what upscaling has to offer between competing products. It will be a lot of extra work. Absolutely. This one from Struggling Shader. Hi, Rich and crew, exclamation point. About GPU reviews and even upscaling settings recommendations, why not use output perceived quality to compare performance? For instance, since FSR is usually the worst looking of for the same input resolution, you can take that as a base for recommending presets and matching overall image quality. The closest preset for DLSS on NVIDIA could be the same. It might be one or two presets lower depending on the game. Am I wrong? I know it's a little bit subjective and a little bit of extra work, but you guys have the most credible eyes in the industry and the benchmark suite doesn't change that often. Keep up the great work, exclamation point. This one from Mitten-Faced Lass. Hey Rich, in regards to apples GPU comparisons, I personally definitely think they're a bit outdated / not that useful anymore. Comparing native 4K performance in a title when it features both DLSS and FSR, or only one or the other, etc., isn't realistic. People are going to use the technologies that give them better and smoother experiences. Sometimes that means the competitor doesn't really have an answer, and that's fine. It's the reality of the market. If anything, I think emphasizing that in reviews will push competitors to respond and improve those areas they're lacking in. And for the average user, it will provide an accurate view of how the hardware will serve them. Apples to apples is intellectually interesting, but at the end of the day, it's not how the hardware is used 90% of the time. Well, that percentage, I think, is possibly arbitrary, but I think the sentiment is bang on.
Yeah.
Oliver, thoughts on this?
I think it's very complex. I can see both sides of it myself. I think there's probably it would be really nice to have something like an objective benchmark where we could say, ISO image quality keeping the same across vendors. How does one card perform relative to another? I think the problem with that is that the artifacts that are created by FSR are quite different in character to the artifacts that are created by DLSS when you really push DLSS. I think they're quite different. and also just because the existence of such a tool is a little questionable. There's some interesting stuff from Netflix, I know, on comparing different video and comparing different compression models, but I'm not totally sure that it's applicable for us. Obviously, you guys could speak a little bit more to that, because I think if they can look at that. I think on the other end of the spectrum, you could just go completely subjective and say, well, this card is really good. For instance, if you're just reviewing a card in general, like this card might be really good for ray tracing at this resolution, or this card might be giving you a good experience in games with full path tracing at this resolution because of ray reconstruction potentially on the NVIDIA side and general graphics performance. But obviously that isn't going to satisfy people who just want to see bar charts. So I really don't know how you resolve that, at least in the short term, with something that is going to be appropriately objective while still capturing the necessary data and information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I love Mitten Faced Lass's thing there, because I posted about it on Twitter, but Tom's Hardware also, in their DLSS 3.5 Cyberpunk review, they literally said this outright. They're like, we don't know what's going to happen with the GPU market right now. NVIDIA's got these huge advantages. And I think the keeping with the old just benchmarks at like settings like 4K Ultra native just doesn't make any sense anymore. It would be like going back to the year 2003 to 2005. Or actually, I'd say like 2002 to 2004, and you're just like looking at DX7 performance at that point in time or something like that. You're not paying attention to DX 8.1, DX9, and you're not kind of like, and the cards are changing. They're offering vastly different experiences if you go up to DX9, but you're just like, I want to play Max Payne. I want to do Quake 3 Arena benchmarks. And this isn't very helpful to the user to understand, how do I get the most interesting new graphical experience in a game with performance and good image quality and all these things? So if you just kept doing DX7 benchmarks, then you'd be out of date. And I feel like that's the way the benches are right now. As to how we do it, I think I talked about this. It had to have been like 2 years ago. And we also saw it a bit in the discussion that I had, the roundtable with Brian and Jakob there, where it's like the subjective experience of playing the game is really important. And since we do lack great objective tools at the moment, that I think Rich can talk about really quickly about the thing we just tried out, that we need to increase the size of the conclusion of the benchmark video. Yeah. Because that conclusion includes a lot of things like where you say like, okay, I just talked about those graphs, but how are you actually using this in experience? And you say like, maybe the other suggestion here is like, in this game, you'd maybe want to use FSR performance on an AMD GPU, quality mode, 4K quality mode. But on the NVIDIA GPU, you can get away with balanced performance and have maybe even objectively better image quality still in some areas. And you talk about it, you weigh the subjectivity of it at the end of the review, and then you let the user decide. I don't know.
Maybe the argument is that there is some kind of test for upscaling on specific titles, and then we actually test on the resolutions best suited to that card. That possibly, but yeah, I mean, in terms of the test that we're talking about, I think Oliver just alluded to it, that there's actually a number of image quality comparison models based on AI that are out there now, used by the likes of Netflix to figure out decent image quality. One of them is really interesting because it was trained simply by giving people access to two video streams and comparing them, and then they would say which one they thought was best subjectively. And when that is done, thousands upon thousands of times with different people, inherently, basically the biases emerge, and you get a model that basically gives you the opportunity to assess video quality. And we actually did this on DLSS versus FSR2 in Cyberpunk 2077. And basically it gives you a quality result between 0 and 1. Okay, obviously there's lots of decimal points involved, so you could say like 1 to 10,000 if you like, just by changing the decimal point. In virtually every scenario, DLSS came out better than FSR2. However, the actual number generated wasn't actually that much different. And so we put together we took all of the DLSS versus FSR2 examples from Alex's Starfield video and tested those as well. And again, DLSS was better than FSR2, quantifiably better according to this. But the thing that sort of didn't sit right with me was the fact that stuff, for example, that fiery example for your Starfield comparison, it's pretty blatant that FSR just isn't coping very well. DLSS copes better, but it wasn't reflected in the score that was pumped out. And I honestly think that maybe the model is just looking for compression artifacts. And I think, as opposed to, seeing what is objectively a better or subjectively a better image. And I think it was just the fact that the nature of FSR2 artifacting is a bit noisier, right? And so that was actually coming back from the model as like more pronounced compression artifacting. So the search goes on for some kind of tool to objectively measure image quality, or subjectively via a neural network. Tricky, really, really
tricky stuff.
Yeah. I'm just sort of seeing what, this support question here from David Laszlo. Hey DF, I can see the need for the image quality comparison. To be honest, this is one of my gripes about GPU reviews. They just show raw numbers. I think it would be good for users to actually see why upscaling X is better than upscaling Y. You see, that's kind of like a different topic, which Alex does quite well in his adjacent content. Maybe a small section in the GPU review could be to match the GPUs in various titles which support both DLSS, FSR, and XeSS. The goal of the section is to identify where the picture quality really falls apart, just like Alex does in his PC videos. For example, FSR users can enjoy a good, close to native presentation in balance mode, while DLSS could go down to performance mode. This would show the value of the feature on the card. I'd say 5 to 10 minute segment in a handful of titles can be enough to show the user what can be achieved. Yeah, there is merit to that. This is quite interesting because we had a conversation with Tom Peterson with Intel about this last year, right, Alex? And he was coming up with the notion of basically like a canned sequence that is run on all of the upscalers and then compared to what you might call ground truth. And where there are deviations, there would be some kind of, I don't know what it was, a visual highlight or maybe a heat map.
Yeah, it was like the heat maps that we have actually as part of FPS Detect, FPS GUI, Rich. Like the difference between frame stuff.
It could.
Yeah, but so this is something Brian alluded to in Brian Catanzaro when we were talking to him, but talking about the training process for DLSS 3.5. They are using Omniverse and Unreal Engine, most likely 5. I didn't actually say which version. I'm pretty sure it's 5 because of the path tracing there. But they're probably using something like Matinee, or whatever they call it these days. I forget it. It's the frame, like the ability to track view the camera along a way and have the settings be perfect. But that's a lot of setup time. We could do it though. John's done these things before for videos. It would not be that hard to have him make a sequence, and then you could just run on different computers. But there's the issue that not everything is deterministic in video game rendering. So you'd have to really make sure it is a ridiculously deterministic, like it's literally the exact same every single time. And I don't know how possible that is. And then, what are you achieving with this scenario? It would have to be it would have to show off all the different things. Like you've got third-person games, you've got first-person games, you've got camera whip pans, and all these things that a user can do with a mouse and or controller. The mouse is so differentiating on PC. It is, like I talked about before with checkerboard rendering. I was like, yeah, that maybe works really well on a controller where you're soft panning, but on a mouse, you're just like, zoop, and you're all of a sudden like at a completely different area. And it's like, what happens now? And this is one of the test cases that you don't get on console. And you'd have to somehow maybe reflect that there. It's a lot. I like the idea a lot, but there's the danger there of that becoming like the test bed and the thing that we use as an objective measuring when it's maybe not really representative, and if it's maybe overemphasizing certain aspects by accident. because you don't have the huge suite. Like I haven't done one of them in a while, but the image quality videos that I did, like there was those 10. I don't know how many points there were. There were too many points. It was so hard to make those videos, people, and you can't definitely do that for each and every GPU review. It would take so much time.
Yeah.
Those things took like a week and a half by themselves, maybe even 2 weeks almost. So this is a hard one. I would love to have the ability to hand this work off to an AI that says, oh, I know what ghosting is. Oh, I know what fizzle is. I know what aliasing is.
Yeah.
I would like that.
Any further thoughts, Oliver?
Well, I think also one further problem that could potentially pop up is the fact that I think DLSS implementations and XeSS implementations, maybe just by their AI nature and their generalizable nature, are actually relatively similar between games. But with FSR2, there are some really nasty ones, like Remnant 2. Its FSR2 implementation, at least at launch, looked like really bad. It had all kinds of artifacting everywhere. It might have been using the earlier 2.0 version. I'm not totally sure. It looked quite bad, and that was very apparent even just using the PC version for a few minutes to test image quality against consoles. So it's a little bit hard to say, okay, here's a generalizable case for FSR versus XeSS versus DLSS, because the FSR implementation, or I mean, to be fair, the other implementations of other upsamplers could be bad in that particular title, right?
You're right.
This question from Nico Simmons. No question per se. I just enjoyed the AI visuals roundtable tremendously! ! Thanks. Thank you for providing insight straight from the crucible of the Foundry, my go-to place for this kind of topic. Perhaps. How do you, Richard, and the others from the team perceive the quote-unquote stance of many gamers, also on the PCMR subs, that upscaling and frame gen are not quote-unquote real frames? I feel there is a great potential there for further elaborating. Entirely agree with what has been said on the roundtable myself, but I fear many people will simply not spend the time to watch the longer roundtable video and kind of miss the point. It's not NVIDIA PR. This is intrinsically valuable for all GPU vendors and us gamers, because this is where we are headed, out of necessity even. I know this was discussed often on the Directs, but it might be a nice quote-unquote backtrack or highlight in the coming DF Directs. Have a great rest of the week, you all! Exclamation point. Awesome work, especially the last few months. I feel you really put in the work and it shows. This whole concept of fake frames, and I think the key point from the roundtable from CDPR itself was we fake everything. The whole concept of rendering is that it's faking an effect. Is that an accurate summary of that point? I think it's worth sort of highlighting, Alex.
Yeah, and Oliver can obviously say something about this too, but if you like just try and get anything rendered on the screen, you're making already incredible trade-offs versus what reality is. And it's all, at that point, it's all an approximation. It's all an emulation or a simulation of what it is. It's all trying to cheat to get as much performance as possible. So in that case, and it just goes back through time itself. Like John did a video on water rendering throughout the years for DF Retro. Go back in time on that and look at all the way we all could recognize it in our brain as water from the, from like the NES up until now. We were saying that in our brains because we could identifiably recognize it due to certain characteristics, but they were all just variations and improvements on cheating to get to the point of where we actually have like H2O particles and they're simulated as a giant mass that moves contiguously. It doesn't even make sense to do that. But, it's all cheats. So this new era of cheats is maybe also like a necessity, as mentioned here by Nico, where the cost to relay the cost, like Moore's Law is dead, saying that isn't just talking, like they're obviously making these processors faster. The 4090 is a ridiculously chunk faster than the 3090. But the thing is, like, how can they get the cost? Isn't Moore's Law also talking about reducing the cost as well, too? Or is it just the doubling the production, the size? I don't remember. But basically, you're not communicating that price difference to the consumer anymore. So that's part of it. And this is a way of extracting more performance in a smarter way, saying silicon doesn't just need to be about doubling the amount of GPU compute we have, but it's using a different style of compute to enhance the presentation. So I intrinsically agree with all that. I think it's amazing. I thought the answer from Jakob and Brian on this point were really amazing. And I always will pose the question of, what do you think looks more realistic? A 480p DVD of The Matrix or The Matrix Awakens demo running on an Xbox Series X? What do you think looks more realistic? I don't know. I would say that 480p DVD or whatever it is. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, just to...
it's 480i.
Just to clear it up, Moore's law is the observation that the number of transistors in an integrated circuit doubles about every 2 years. There's nothing really about cost there. It's just been the sort of adjacent thing to Moore's law, which is that, you know, the processes have typically allowed for cost reductions as well. And the cost reductions don't seem to be happening anymore based on that Xbox leak, where a 2024 Xbox Series X is slated to cost the same as a 2021. Yeah.
Same great price. Same
great price.
Adorably all digital.
Adorably all digital.
I think, you know, just to put a cap on the whole GPU thing, I saw a bar chart yesterday for Cyberpunk, and it was basically 4K native path traced, which is an entirely useless bar chart to put together, right? And it starts with the 4090 running at like 34 frames per second. You know, even if you've got the 4090, you're not going to be using native resolution rendering because it's just a stupid way to deploy the resources of the 4090. Why produce the bar chart in the first place other than to impose an artificial apples to apples metric that will apply to all GPUs, but not the way they're actually going to be used? It's nuts. I don't get it. Just to be clear, benchmarks aren't going to go away, right? Because eventually we'll reach the point where there will probably be feature parity at some point in the future. Who knows when that will actually be? Because, you know, NVIDIA is literally like, I don't know, at least 3 years ahead, I'd say, possibly 5 of the competition, based on, you know, the deployment of these new features and the sort of staggered response from the competition. And you can't really ignore that anymore, I don't think. And the fact is also that DLSS is so pervasive now in different titles to the point where if it doesn't have it, somebody makes a mod to add it. Obviously, it's got to be factored into a GPU review. But yeah, it's kind of like possibly the beginning of the end of the bar chart until we have that parity again. And who knows when that will be, if ever.